Happy New Year. Um, I'm just popping in real quick, basically to say Happy New Year and to get back on the grind, the streaming grind. Um, I shaved my beard, I guess, for the new year. I don't know. Um, so we'll see how long this mustache lasts. Probably not long. Yeah, that's right. The streaming grind, Salubri. We'll see. We'll see how long I keep streaming. So far, it's been fun. You know, it's been nice chatting to with everyone. Uh, can't really complain about that part. And been collecting followers pretty steadily. So hopefully that'll continue. I think I still have a video to upload to YouTube to continue that. Here, let me put some light on my face. I'm kind of sitting in the dark here. Um, so that's good. I think this will be my 10th or 11th streaming video. And then once I put it on YouTube, I'll probably do that either later today or over the weekend and put that all together. And I've been kind of shuffling those together. I don't really do a lot on YouTube. I just basically upload whatever I already have done or made. Today, let's see, it's a little after 4. So I've got maybe an hour, a little less. Um, so we can chat and I can go over some Black Hand stuff like I've been doing. I think I was on Death in the Soul, if I remember correctly. And I'll continue from there. And of course, answer any questions anyone may have. And it's okay if anybody doesn't have any questions, or even if nobody's watching me, because I'm enjoying myself regardless. All right, so let's get to the book. As usual, I got my copy of the Black Hand playing the Sabbat um, right here, ready to go. Um, thanks for the question, Salubri. Oh, do I have not have this in the right setting? I do not. Okay, there we go. How do I think the Sabbat reacts to human holidays like the New Year? Well, you would know, since you literally. Oh, thanks for the follow, Chaos Gremlin. Glad I'm not all by myself with just me and Salubri. Otherwise, um, well, you would know Salubri since we literally ran a Sabbat LARP together in Los Angeles. The kind of basic answer to that question, I'd assume. But I think that's a fair question. How the Sabbat would react to human holidays like New Year's and the rest. Well, since they're such a religious sect in and of themselves, I would suspect that in most cases, their own religious holidays, many of which are Rite, would supersede any concerns for mortal holidays. In fact, I would even go so far as to say is that being overly cognizant of mortal holidays could possibly be suspicious in the Sabbat. That perhaps you're a little too connected to your humanity still. Maybe getting presents for a mortal touchstone on Christmas potentially could get you punished pretty severely. I think that kind of thing. There are some holidays that coincide with mortal holidays, though how exactly that's true probably differs geographically. I would say, like some holidays, like the really poorly uh, called Pala Grande, which I'm told means big ball, but like a soccer ball. Like just the original authors, White Wolf authors, just looked up the word ball in Spanish or whatnot, and didn't differentiate between ball a party and ball like a basketball. So it's the big ball. Um, Yes, exactly. So we actually correct that in the Sabbat the Black Hand, actually. We rename it and even have a line about the misnomer, just for fun. We're not really poking fun at any writer per se. But yeah, we have it here as the Pala or Ballo Grande. So we say it's jokingly referred to as the Pala Grande by American Sabat. So American Sabat still call it the Pala Grande because Americans notoriously speak nothing but English and are incurious of other languages. Um, yes, somewhat like soccer equals football. But yes, I would say that in most cases, mortal holidays are ignored by Sabbat or exploited. Like that's a good point, Lime. That like New Year's Eve could be something of a feast day. I'm sure if you were squeamish as a Sabbat for some reason, or maybe not squeamish, or had particular tastes, um, staking out some notorious curves on the road near bars could probably get you some free meals before an ambulance arrives. I guess that is definitely true. But yeah, for the most case, I would say the Sabbat's kind of holiday calendar takes precedence. They have a very almost detailed calendar of holidays within the rites. If you read the rites, it almost reads like a schedule. A coven, in particular, would probably base their entire year around certain rite and where they were going to hold certain rite and all that kind of thing. Nomads, I'd assume it would be more freeform because they don't know where they're going to be on certain auspicious days or conjunctions of the calendar, that kind of thing. But covens would have the resources, and by coven I mean specifically Sabbat packs who are sedentary, who have picked a spot and live there and kind of stake out a physical domain, which of course in V5 is rarer now. Um, it happens, but they have to be a lot more low key. There are very few places that could truly be considered, a Sabbat city anymore. So a coven would probably live near or amongst other vampires of other sex and have to keep their profile on the down low so that they could go about their business and serve the Sword of Cain in the way they serve the Sword of Cain. Probably in a more logistical, as I've spoken of before, probably in a more logistical, administrative way than they did in the past, or in a spiritual way. It is possible that a coven, their arena, like the basically their area of expertise, could be in more spiritual matters, like a ritualist pack that is concerned with absolution, forgiveness, kind of almost like therapy in a sense. Like Sabbat could come to them for working out intractable problems of their faith. Perhaps those final few steps to really solidify their path, or to keep them from falling off the path completely. That would be a very interesting area for a Sabbat pack to be expert on. And of course, they would have to know lots of things about all the paths to really do that. Though, of course, I'd assume there would be one or two paths that they would really be known for. Um, like a pack that were Book of Nod scholars, per se, in particular, or scholars of the First City, or of even Cain's origins or something like that. Obviously, it would be very useful to Nodists who wanted to regain ground that possibly they'd lost on the path, or to take those final steps, or, as I said, not fall off the path completely. So when we ran a Sabbat LARP in Los Angeles, and we were hoping to do a full year, and for as long as it would go. Actually, it was kind of there was a initial story arc, obviously, but which was kind of planned for a full year, and then there would be continuations of that if the game was running strong. So because of circumstances, moving back to the Maryland area from LA, we actually had to cut that LARP short. I think we only ran it for 6-7 months in total. And if I remember correctly, we would run it once a month. And basically, in that game, every third game, I think the first game, the third game, and the sixth game were all Raite. They were basically holy days. And the span of time that passed between games was kind of narrative, I guess is the best way to put it. But it wasn't necessarily, an actual month between games, that kind of thing. Basically, the marking of time was strictly these feast days. Yes, and there was a very strong online presence. We ran a Discord server with that Sabbat LARP that was just constant. It was just like 24/7 role playing in that Discord server. Salubri really, I mean, she ran a lot of the game on the ground, obviously, and in the Discord. But the Discord, she was really all over that. But we took the Discord very seriously. We didn't allow like challenges or anything like that, and we used kind of a modified challenge system as it was. It was very rules light. On my Patreon, actually, if you go to my Patreon, which I have a link in the top corner there. If you go to my Patreon, I actually have the rules that we used for that LARP. And we had basically a system of negotiated ransom for outcomes so that people could basically trade consequences for outcomes. And if that failed, then it would go to tests, would go to challenges using the by night system. So everybody had a by night system character sheet because everyone was familiar with that. But when it came to actually adjudicating the situations, we had our own rule set for that. And actually on my Patreon is the calendar that we used for that Sabbat LARP. And how it basically played out, and the kind of modified status system that we had, where we used basically like chits for status, and you could basically spend chits, these like status coins, as a payment to other Sabbat if you wanted to. Basically, like, I'm very recognized right now, and status was very come and take. Like, unless you had a title, your actual like status outside your title fluctuated a great deal. So you could like spend those coins for favors from other Sabbat if you wanted to, or for them to overlook a faux pas, that kind of thing. But more importantly, I guess, is you could also spend those status coins for NPCs to do things. I think one of the bishops was an NPC. The archbishop, played by Salubri actually in the initial game, was an NPC. So you could spend them for favors. And I think there actually was a challenge. Like the Archbishop wanted something from Mexico City. And she basically challenged the Sabbat to do like the Sabbat of the city to do great deeds. So that they could make a name for themselves, so that she could request this like relic she wanted from Mexico City. And so there was basically like a competition in basically one arc of the games for everybody to get as much status as possible from, doing things and performing Raite and, murdering sect enemies and that kind of thing, and giving sermons. I think whatever pack got the most status coins could request something, specifically the Archbishop. I think one of the pack priests ended up becoming a bishop, actually, through that system. But basically, though, that system actually fluctuated because you could gain status on Raite nights and the game between Raite nights, and of course you could gain status on the Discord, which was basically between games as well. But on the night of the Raite, as soon as you walked onto the floor, through the door of the S-Spot, basically the holiday night, all your status that you'd gained would drain to 0, and you'd only retain your title. Basically, everything was kind of refreshed, and that included negative status too, actually, unless it was a flaw on your sheet. So basically, all, in a sense, sins were forgiven, and old accomplishments no longer would be upheld. You'd kind of fresh start on that holiday, on that festival day, and of course each game had one Nocturus Raite that was the center point of the game, but not the whole game. And there was lots of politicking and all that. So the status coins kind of going away also kind of reinforced the idea that you couldn't sit on your laurels, that no matter how old you were, or how many old favors you had, and all that, that wasn't going to help you in the Sabbat, because the Sabbat rejects that kind of that old system that, as they called it, the old boys network, where basically the elders are basically just sitting on this hoard of favors and accomplishments, um, and are able to block anybody else's advancement because of their old accomplishments from decades, if not centuries before. And basically, the Sabbat's rejection of that required a new mechanical system for the status that also reflected that. And we felt that did a pretty good job of doing that, by making the status coins basically refresh on holidays. And people would basically politic for different positions, of course, within the Sabbat, and different favors from different packs who are good at different things, and what kind of role they would play in the upcoming Arcturus Vitae. Because it was prestigious, of course, to be the pack priest giving the Sermon of Cain. It's prestigious, of course, to be the pack priest, like filling the pack responsible for filling the bloodbaths. When the new bishops come in and all that kind of thing. So I think that answers the question, and is a bit of a tangent. But the basic concept is that Sabbat have their own kind of holiday calendars, and that mortal holidays probably are more used as a way for them to hide their own dirty business and deeds, or perhaps participate in Rite or even Ignobilis Rite in ways that hide their identities. Yes, a good stun lock is always good. Like I remember there are basically like Ignobilis Rites where Sabbat basically just fuck shit up. They do real life demolition derby in the streets of the city. Just a couple of packs and some cars smashing into everything. Or they play tag with guns in the middle of the streets of a city, that kind of thing. That's more kind of 90s Sabbat, I guess, but still, fun and games. And still a Rite that, we detailed, I believe, in the official V5 Sabbat book and in the Sabbat of the Black Hand. So there is still some tongue-in-cheek fun to be had amongst mortal holidays and amongst mortals. And that's certainly a route to go down when playing Sabbat. And I think it's probably the way most people assume Sabbat games go, that there's basically just kind of a lot of, gratuitous violence, murder, and all that, and not much else, and that the whole kind of bite and cry ethos of a standard Vampire the Masquerade game goes out the window, or that the political intriguing is just not as deep within the Sabbat, and I would say that's just not the case. That there's a lot of depth in Sabbat play, and that's why it's such a popular sect to this day. I would argue that probably Sabbat play in live action kind of kept Vampire the Masquerade alive, from what I'd seen, when it basically was 10 years of no books and no new material for the game. There are still a lot of people who continue to play the game, and I'd say the Sabbat player is probably a very hardcore center or heart of the game for quite a while, because the people who really like to play Sabbat really like to play Sabbat. And I would say a lot of the more, and I'm not to Edition War, a lot of the kind of non-Sabbat players went to Requiem. And to be honest, there really wasn't a lot in Requiem that really duplicated the Sabbat in a meaningful way. Requiem really was the vampire game. I would call it an edition of Vampire the Masquerade, really, that reimagined the game more than a whole new game. It kind of had more Masquerade bits as the game went on. And a lot of Sabbat aspects were kind of in the game, but for the most part, Requiem was very human-centric. A lot of the New World of Darkness, or what's now called Chronicles of Darkness, is very human-centric. A lot of the stories were around humans. The concept of touchstones is introduced there. The way the humanity system works is almost universal in the Chronicles of Darkness. And basically the main conceit of Chronicles of Darkness is that whatever you're playing, you start as a human. So you start as a human. You could technically, if you wanted to, make a human character sheet, and then kind of slap the template of vampire, werewolf, whatever, on that human character sheet, and that was the kind of primary conceit of the Chronicles of Darkness, what was called New Worlds of Darkness. Um, so there really wasn't a kind of transhumanist, anti-human um, sect you could really play as a PC or ethos you could subscribe to in Requiem, and so perhaps that's one of the reasons Sabbat players stayed with Vampire the Masquerade for the most part. I don't really know. I can't say. That was just my supposition. But that's probably it. And I know when we wrote Belial's Brood for Vampire the Requiem, which many people consider, the Sabbat of Requiem, we were really discouraged from making them playable in any way. This is, of course, for first edition Vampire the Requiem. From my understanding, Belial's Brood is completely absent in Vampire the Requiem second edition. Which is fine by me, because you can still buy that Belial's Brood book, which I still think is a very good book. And that book, even though you can play as the Brood, it's still, within the context of being very human-centric. I mean, in the Brood, basically the ultimate goal is... Thanks! Yeah, thanks. I think the stash looks pretty good. I always think I look good in a stash. I wasn't planning on keeping the full beard for so long. I really only grew it for Darkness Emergent Atlanta, for that LARP in Atlanta where I was playing Victoria Ash's child. I only grew it for that, really. But I kept it because everybody kept telling me it looked good. So I guess I succumbed to peer pressure. I succumbed, or partner pressure, I should say. Everybody was drooling over the beard, so I kept it. Yes, exactly. Exactly that. But yes, I shaved it. I usually do the mustache lash when I shave, but I thought it looked okay, so I kept it. But yeah, nonetheless, ultimately in Belial's Brood, you would succumb to the beast. That was basically the ultimate goal. In Belial's Brood, part of the conceit was that the beast is trying to tell you something, and that you just have to listen, and that you can get some kind of epiphany or better understanding of the beast as you let it grow more powerful, and you kind of reach some kind of accord with it. But that ultimately the beast will consume you. That there's no stopping the beast. You can, some vampires, slow it down, but that's not really what the Brood is about. The Brood is about understanding the beast, gaining power from the beast, and, burning really bright while you're on this earth. Speaking of beasts, my cat is rummaging around the scratching post. I see him making a break for it. He only blessed us with his presence for a mere moment. Yeah, I have choices with my facial hair, Man of Leisure. I'm very fortunate, I guess. I still have most of the hair on my head, thankfully. We'll see how long that lasts. And yes, I can grow full beards and all that, and very quickly, too. I used to actually do, mutton chops for a Sabbat LARP I would do at the end of the month, and then at the beginning of the month, and then I would be in a Camarilla LARP at the end of the month, and basically the other way around. So I basically have a month to grow these mutton chops for my Sabbat character, and so I did that for quite a long time, where I would go between this Camarilla character who was clean shaven, kind of a Don Draper, Malkavian ad man kind of character. And then, so I'd very clean shaven, sharp suit, and then I would have kind of a biker pander for the Sabbat game, Nodist, kind of evangelical, I guess, symbol of the deed kind of Nodist character, and he had big, biker mutton chops. I have a picture of that around here someplace, but I kind of constantly did that. So I've been fortunate in fast-growing facial hair, I guess. I do have to shave nonstop when I keep it clean-shaven, which is a little annoying, but it's all right. Um, so for Belial's Brood and all that, I think it definitely gave a very different character to what you could play as a vampire who wasn't interested in the kind of managing humanity minigame. Requiem didn't really have a lot of space there for that kind of play. Um, so there was really nothing kind of to take up the space of Sabbat play in a meaningful way in Vampire the Requiem, and I still don't think there is. Um, so perhaps that's one of the reasons that Sabbat characters, players, remained with the Vampire the Masquerade rule set. And perhaps why they seem to be very particular about how the Sabbat is managed, worded, and put together in every edition, especially V5. And of course, everybody has their own concept of what the Sabbat is like, depending upon what edition they were introduced to the Sabbat. I, of course, have a very kind of second edition viewpoint when it comes to the Sabbat. That was my kind of favorite version of the Sabbat until we wrote our own. Obviously, this is now my favorite version of the Sabbat. But those are the Steve Brown books, the Player's Guide to the Sabbat and Storyteller's Guide to the Sabbat, and to a lesser extent. Oh my goodness, a phone call. Okay, well I don't answer my phone because I'm a normal person. Who would answer your phone nowadays? It's crazy. It's always spam. Like 9 times out of 10, it's spam. It's kind of crazy. They've basically allowed these amazing devices to become useless by allowing these spam callers to basically own the whole system. But nevertheless, with right, Sabbat, Player's Guide to the Sabbat, and to a lesser extent, Dirty Secrets of the Black Hand, of course, also a Steve Brown book. I mean, obviously, that was very tongue-in-cheek and, maybe not the best written version of the Sabbat or whatever, but it really resonated and it was interesting, and there was lots of cool mechanics and stuff like that, and you could really play around with it. And there wasn't this kind of push to make the Sabbat fit some kind of humanist or bite and cry mold. And I've talked about this before and how kind of revised in the V20 version of Sabbat went down this kind of path of hypocrisy, like Camarilla light, but Camarilla but with dog collars kind of thing, which I particularly didn't care for. So I'm much more enamored with this more stripped down, kind of dirtier, meaner Sabbat, but it also has more of the transhumanist elements of play that I'm very interested in. Oh, thanks for following Icar and Ink. I love the follows. The more follows the better, everybody. Oh, look, Hyper, my cat, is also watching along now. He's got a seat. He's now part of the audience. I don't know if he'll be taking questions. Yeah, Icar. I would say that the Sabbat could be mean. I mean, depending. They can also be very loving. Interesting. Oh, thanks for following, Bob Roberts. Whoa, I reached a follower goal. 40 followers. All right. Sweet. I love that for me. Yeah, huge news if true. I'm hype. So yeah, Icar, I would say the Sabbat can be mean, but also, I've had some very touching moments in Sabbat games, in Sabbat LARPs in particular. I can remember one particular scene where my modest priest character basically made some, kind of selfish decisions in basically like rescuing a packmate this game was kind of crazy, but I believe they were kidnapped by some demons. You know how that goes, from Demon the Fallen demons, not your kind of old school infernalist demons. I think a packmate of mine was captured by some Demon the Fallen demons, and I had to rescue them, and I made some kind of deal to rescue them, and of course everybody got very upset, even though I came clean about it right away. because everyone was like, "How did you rescue them?" And I said, "Well, I went to the fucking demon lair, and punched a bunch of people in the face, and then cut a deal to get them free." And of course, cutting deals with demons is pretty frowned upon in the Sabbat. And luckily, I was able to wriggle my way out of that because I was a big dumb lug, oh shucks, kind of priest, and also very useful to the powers that be. So between that and the powers that be basically thinking they could use me for their own purposes if they basically, if I owed them one for getting me off the hook in a sense, it worked out for me. But more importantly, I had a very emotional scene with the other players there who basically made it personal when I was explaining myself about that and why I was doing things. Because I was framing it in the light that I was saving a packmate, that I was doing it for the Sabbat, that as a Nodist, this packmate was basically, I was the priest of the pack. And this was kind of a newly embraced packmate who I was literally teaching the Path of Cain to before they were kidnapped by these demons. So I felt personally responsible for rescuing them. But another member of the Sabbat basically pointed out how selfish it was of me to do so without basically by going by myself and by taking it on all by myself and not for trusting other members of the Sabbat to have my back. So that was a very touching moment for me personally, because they let me see it in a very different light than I had experienced it as the character. So I don't really know if those role-playing experiences, I've really had them as common in Camarilla play, because I feel in Sabbat play, you're very more likely to have those kind of like honest conversations and wear your heart on your sleeve, I would say, and get your heart ripped off out of your chest. Than you are in the Camarilla play, where basically the double dealing, backstabbing, intrigue, that kind of like stone-faced, like don't give anything away role play is a lot more common, and kind of almost the epitome of play. And you really have to seek out the players who are interested in that kind of play to lose scenario, and often that kind of stuff falls on NPCs to take the take those emotional licks very often. But to each their own experience. I have had emotional experiences in Camarilla play. It's just been less common. So I think it's possible in all kinds of play, but hopefully people will find the value in Sabbat play that's not just fucking shit up. Though fucking shit up's fine too. I don't really see the problem with fucking shit up. I mean, if you're just playing at your own table, I don't see any problem with playing however you want to play, as long as everyone at the table is comfortable with it and has consented to what's happening, enthusiastically and in an ongoing manner. Like I've actually never run Bluebeard's Bride privately. I've only run that at conventions. I've run Bluebeard's Bride, specifically the version of Bluebeard's Bride where you are playing the sons of Bluebeard, basically discovering the horrors that have happened to your mother, and what Bluebeard is about, and like if you're going to accept his legacy and all that stuff. So that was very interesting to play it from a kind of like male perspective, to play feminist horror from a male perspective. It was obviously I was the DM, and I had a table of other men at the table playing the Sons of Bluebeard. I've run it 2 or 3 times at conventions, and I've spoken about Bluebeard's Bride at Gen Con actually for wow, my memory is totally for Magpie. So it's a game I'm very familiar with and think it's fantastic, really brilliant. Obviously, one of the founders of Magpie wrote it along with Whitney Beltran and I think another author. So it was an incredible game. Yeah, Iker, Bluebeard's Bride is an incredible game. I recommend it for everyone, not just women. Obviously, it is a feminist horror game, but I think it's great for anybody. I think usually it is played in kind of segregated tables. Usually, you'll have a table that is all women with most often a woman storyteller, or a table that's all men, usually with a male storyteller. That's the way I've seen it. I've actually never run it for a table of all women, I don't think. Maybe. I don't remember. Perhaps the first time I ran it. No, the other way around. I think I've only run it for using the addendum, because there are two editions to Bluebeard's Bride. There's like a lore book and another book, a book of mirrors, I believe it's called. And one of those has the alternate style of play where it's, you're playing Bluebeard's son. But personally, I am very comfortable with role playing like swapped genders. Personally, I know not everybody is comfortable with that. I know some tables aren't comfortable with that. That's not really my experience. Personally, I guess each table is different. I don't think this ST or DM should have a veto on what gender your character is, in particular. Though I guess if there are issues at the table and with the play group, that could be a discussion. Hopefully that doesn't end any friendships. I personally have only had one instance where I remember when I was living in New York, like years and years ago, I showed up at kind of like a meetup Vampire the Masquerade game to play Vampire the Masquerade, and it wasn't like a camera game. It was kind of like just we basically like went to like a bodega cafe place like near Times Square, and we played like in the back. And I remember I came there and they let me play. It was like V20 had just like come out, because I remember I had like the leather-bound V20 book, and everybody was oohing and awing about it. My my friend at the time had actually gone down to New Orleans for like the LARP, and I asked her to get me the book while she was down in New Orleans to get like a leather-bound copy of it, which actually I still have on my shelf. But I remember I played a Zemese woman, a character, and everyone at the table was kind of like, "What? You're a girl?" And they were all kind of like freaked out about it at first. But after we started playing, it was fine. I personally, maybe because I was one of the older role players there, was a little confused that they'd actually never played with anyone who'd played like a character with a different gender than their own. Obviously, less common in LARP. I have seen gender swap players, characters in LARP, though I don't think that's particularly much of an issue, especially, maybe not especially, but I think in LARP sometimes costuming can get a little out of hand. I come from the East Coast, which is a lot less, in my experience, costume and kind of presentation centric. I remember when I LARPed on the West Coast, kind of costuming, appearance, look, kind of really embodying the like physical look of your character was like very important, which kind of makes sense given the fashion, costume, acting, business industry on the West Coast, especially in LA. But on the East Coast, like you'd be the prince and you'd show up in a t-shirt and jeans, and people would just have to pretend that you're a really well-dressed Ventru, and that was just part of the game. Funny enough, Vampire was the first teacher I ever played in where someone played a character opposite their gender identity. Right. I mean, I think it's useful and fun. Oh, yes. I mean, I would agree with that, Iker, as well. Like European, I've also seen European costume. In Europe, I've seen that costuming is very important. A friend of mine is like Facebook friend of mine. We actually met in a Warhammer Slaanesh roleplay Facebook group, oddly enough, that my partner introduced me to. But they are huge into historical wargaming and LARP in Europe. And yeah, the costuming out there is crazy. Like some of the costumes she does are just mad. Like she has a costume which is kind of like a Swiss Guard costume, if you ever seen that, where it's like the fabric is like different and crisscrossed and all that, and she like did it all herself with like the historical right buttons and everything. It's insane. Once I get that costume on, Mike is gone and the character is in. Right? Yeah, that's fair. I've heard that. Right. Yeah. Salubri and I. Yeah, I've heard that for bleed, some people find that bleed is much easier to deal with heavy costuming and makeup. One of my co-authors on the Black Hand playing the Sabbat, Rachel Judd, she would say that part of the to your point, Iker, that part of the benefit of costuming and makeup and all that is that it would help her get into character because she would put on the costume and the dress and all that, and she could get out of the mental space as well as the physical space of herself and get into character. But once the game was over, any bleed or bad feelings that maybe had happened during play, she could also kind of discard as she was taking off the makeup, as she was taking off the costume, which I found very interesting. Because bleed was a concept that I understood conceptually, but really hadn't delved into in any kind of like academic or rigorous intellectual way. Coming from the East Coast, bleed was definitely a concept that really wasn't thought of much, but coming onto the West Coast, where kind of acting and theater obviously was part of the culture of the LARP on the West Coast. That idea of bleed was, they understood it much better than we did. And right, Salubri and I actually wrote for Mark Reinhagen for a LARP he did in the Ukraine. This was many years ago, obviously way before the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. It was in what was the name of this city? Lviv. All right, so it was in Lviv, Ukraine. Right, 2017. That's correct, Salubri. So we wrote a whole LARP with Mark Reinhagen. I think we did a really good job. It was very interesting. It had like a strategic element to it. Like there was like a city map that you would gain things from and all that. Salubri and I were both supposed to go actually to Lviv to help run that LARP and play in it. Thanks for the follow, Lunar Love. I appreciate it. The more follows, the better, I guess. I don't know. I don't really get stage fright, so I enjoy people watching me. I don't know. Does that sound creepy? But anyway, Mark Reinhagen's LARP in the Ukraine, it was a blast. I wasn't able to go at the last minute, unfortunately. So Salubri had to go by herself. It was her first international plane flight, I believe, and the first time she was going someplace all by herself on the planet. So that was pretty crazy for her. Though she made a lot of friends and made airport buddies and stuff like that. So she had a really good time. The space they had in Lviv was incredible. It was some old academic scholars castle or something. It was just with these marble floors and double staircases, just really incredible, painted ceilings. It was nuts. It was an incredible space for the LARP. And since it was Europe, obviously the costuming there was next level. All the Nosferatu, which I believe Salubri was playing a Nosferatu. All the Nosferatu were incredibly had incredible makeup and all that. So yeah. Yeah, bleed can be very difficult. Yeah, so it was Lviv in 2017, Salubri. What's that, Bob? Bob, we'd run into bleed a lot into Dystopia Rising, which was one long form with full weekend events with no breaks, immersive, and very collaborative, connective in terms of character needs for in-game survival. Yeah, I've never played in Dystopia Rising. I've heard of it, of course, and I know there's a Dystopia Rising RPG book that came out. I believe Mark Kelly actually did the cover for it, if I remember correctly. I might be misremembering that. I knew some people who played Dystopia Rising and what's the other one, Twin Masks, and I think there's a weekend one, Wasteland Weekend. That's another one. Yeah, that was another thing on the West Coast that I'd never really experienced before, which is camping LARPs, where basically people would go and they would camp. Usually they would be fantasy LARPs, though I believe Dystopia Rising was also these a camping LARP. So you would go with a group of friends, you would actually camp out, in the woods someplace, which is, crazy thing to do in a place with mountain lions, but to each their own. So you'd camp out, and then you would role play and like keep a tent and all that stuff. Which I guess for a fantasy LARP is pretty interesting. I know Salubri did a LARP in college where they would do that too. Um, there was a very old Gods of Appalachia LARP in LA. Oh, right. Well, I remember there was also a World of Darkness kind of LARP that wasn't World of Darkness, um, but I forget what that was called as well. So yeah, there are lots of LARPs, and I could see how bleed could be a much bigger issue when you can't get away from the game. When you're literally, for the next 2 days, you're out in the middle of nowhere. Um, I used to run games over a weekend, but it would be in a hotel, and people would have rooms or they'd live nearby, that kind of thing. So you weren't really like completely cut off from like your support system. Usually, you could find private spaces to get out of character. Usually, if you had a room, that kind of thing. I think there was only one instance where uh, my I don't know, co-author, partner, or whatever, of the LARP and I really had to deal with like massive bleed issues, uh, where there was kind of a spat between characters, and that turned into a spat between players that we had to manage. And like when you've got 120 people running around and maybe 5 or 6 storytellers, really, it can be very difficult when all of your attention has to be focused on 2 or 3 people who's allowed their bleed to develop into actual personal issues. Um, so thankfully, I've been fortunate in that I haven't had to deal with that too often in game as a storyteller. I have had to deal with bleed personally myself. There's certainly been instances um, where I've had to kind of take a step back and see what was actually going on with things. Um, I guess for the most part, I've been pretty fortunate with LARP and bleed. I've heard lots of horror stories. I've certainly experienced, I've experienced and seen terrible things at LARPs, unfortunately. Like prejudice, racism, homophobia, all that. Unfortunately, the people who play in these games can bring their own shit to the game, and that sucks. But there's not much you can do about it other than deal with it as it arises. And bleed is a lot easier to deal with, I would say, than all those things. Um, yeah, there wasn't any language to describe what was happening until relatively recently, which made it even harder as a showrunner GM to figure out what was and how to address it. Yeah, I agree with that, Bob. When I was running LARPs in the well, I first started playing LARPs in the early '90s, and then started running them in the mid '90s. That definitely was not a concept I was familiar with at all. Like the idea of bleed or that these negative emotions could experience, tilt my real life perceptions of things, or that I would take those feelings and that would express or become the core of how I felt about someone who had only experienced as their character. So that I think as a younger person was definitely true. As a younger person, I definitely formed opinions about people um, based on how I experienced their character in a game, and I didn't think too much about that. Now I can kind of look back and think, well, I didn't like that guy because I didn't like his character. Um, though in some instances I didn't like the guy because he sucked. So it can be hard to tell. But there are definitely instances where I can think of, oh, I really only knew that guy's character, that kind of thing. I feel probably when I was younger, people weren't really even like role playing to the level that that was true that often, actually, where I would kind of form these opinions about them. But every now and then, I'm sure it happened. And I'm sure the bleed was part of the reason I played. I think that like adrenaline rush, your heart beating, having those feelings was part of the rush of the game. And even though that wasn't the main thing for me, I definitely recognize I was having fun while that was happening. I guess what could be a danger is, though I don't know if it's a danger. I've heard, this is a discussion I've had with European LARPers mostly. This kind of like playing for bleed concept, or bleed is good, that kind of thing. I think in from the American LARP perspective, and I know we're kind of off topic talking about like LARP and LARP stuff, but hopefully this is of interest to some people. But like kind of an American LARP perspective, bleed is bad, and it's about basically the infiltration of feeling of imagined feelings and imagined role play that turns into real feelings that cause you actual emotional harm, and that can form your perspectives about other people. So you could allow the hate you feel for another character to affect how you're doing. You let that hate penetrate you in a sense. And now it forms the basis of how you perceive another player, not just their character. Like, obviously, that's the danger, and that's kind of where I would say, is the main viewpoint from the American perspective. I would say, Iker, that you've met a lot of good LARPers and role players who turned out to be absolutely horrendous people. Okay, yeah, that's fair. I could believe that too. That has definitely happened to me too. Salubri and I can definitely, we could talk a lot about that, but I will not. That definitely, I have run into people who were incredible LARPers, who were good game runners, maybe even good writers or storytellers, and yes, we're just terrible pieces of shit. Like that has happened to me multiple times. Unfortunately, I would say in the LARP scene, what can happen, and perhaps because of the subject matter of vampire, maybe it's more common in vampire LARP. I couldn't say. I have no numbers. But definitely it's something that's happened to me in vampire LARP a great deal. Perhaps if I played other kinds of LARP, it would be just as prevalent. But unfortunately, this kind of like cult of personality can develop around a LARP runner, or an especially good LARPer, but most often it's the LARP runner. But sometimes it can be a LARPer. That either way, and that cult of personality can give them an inflated ego, a sense that they can do whatever they want, and to perceive other people as subjects or objects that are part of their story, which can get very dangerous. And of course, if they're a runner as opposed to just a LARPer, which is why I feel it's more prevalent around those who run LARPs, is that they have things they can give you. They can bribe people to do things they wouldn't necessarily want to do otherwise, with plots, a certain type of character. Excuse me. Personalized things within game. They can also bribe people, as silly as it sounds, to bribe someone with fake LARP money, as it were, or like plot lines or whatnot, or the chance to play a kind of character you want to play. It happens, and people in the real world are bribed, for status and societal position all the time. And LARP can mean a lot to people, and so it can be used to either keep them silent when they should speak up, or to do things they'd rather not do. So that is a shame. It's a little off topic from Bleed, but unfortunately it is something to be wary of. If you're in a LARP and someone is abusing their power, if there's no mechanisms to check that in place, there should be. And unfortunately, often those mechanisms can be easily corrupted. I've read a good deal about that often these kind of mechanisms of fair play and kind of take on almost like HR aspect, a corporate kind of HR aspect, where they're really there to protect the people in power, as opposed to rectify any kind of situations that come up between a player and a runner, that kind of thing. So it is what it is. I think it's something people have to be wary of. and understanding of when they come into a LARP space. That the same kind of terrible people can be in that space that you would meet, like, you know, at a bar or a party or whatever. Just because you're having a good time with that person when they're playing with their character doesn't necessarily mean they're a good person that you should, you know, endanger yourself by being like being overly trusting, that kind of thing. I'd always recommend that if you go to a LARP, go with someone you know in real life, that you have actual trust and companionship with, just in case. Just like going to like a bar you don't know, I would say better to go with a friend you know and can trust, that kind of thing. Getting back to Bleed, and maybe we'll have time to actually talk about Sabbat stuff, but getting back to Bleed, I would say that in the American context, it's often seen as strictly a negative thing. And I know some of this controversy recently came up in, I believe it's called Bloodstained Love. I don't own the book, but I've heard mixed things about it. But I know some people love it. But I believe in the Bloodstained Love book, they discuss Bleed, and they take a very Eurocentric approach to the discussion of Bleed. That some people in America, especially, found problematic or dangerous. That basically their discussion of Bleed in the book was very positive. That they didn't really spend enough time talking about the dangers of Bleed, and what negative side effects of Bleed could be. Like I said, I haven't read the book, so this is just from the commentary that I've heard of on the other end. And that's less to like talk about the book and whatever problems it may have had or how good it was, and more to say that I do believe there is a split, kind of Eurocentric versus American split on Bleed and perception, just like with costuming and I'd say RPGs and gaming in general. There's definitely kind of an American way to play and a kind of Euro way to play. I think that's one of the reasons that kind of that terminology of like Nordic style LARP exists to this day. Is that American LARP is very often more kind of like objective focused, often more focused on like the plots and the goals and the setting, that kind of thing, while European plot can be a lot more about characterization, the vibes, and also what is called like playing to lose, like basically putting yourself in uncomfortable situations or purposefully kind of like taking a dive, as we'd say here in America, to either further the story or to create an interesting situation. And that there's certain kind of proclivities in Nordic LARP that are more communal than in kind of American style LARP, which is more individualized. So I know that the kind of concept of Bleed, from that book's perspective, Bloodstained Love, perhaps kind of identified that split, that Euro-American split in the Bleed concept. That part of that I'd say in the Euro concept, perhaps one of the motivations to play is for the Bleed, while in the American viewpoint, it seems Bleed is seen as more of a danger of play that has to be managed, as opposed to kind of an upside or perhaps a reasonable thing to play for. It says we're about to have an ad break. I don't know what that looks like, if you can still see or hear me. But hopefully you can. I don't know. I don't like watch enough Twitch, maybe. Oh, for real? Can you like not see me when there's an ad break? Is that actually true? Or is it just like am I in the like itty bitty corner while like a giant like Budweiser a Budweiser commercial? Oh, you can only hear me during the ad break. I'm muted during the ad break? Oh, for real? Just a big ass Budweiser ad. Okay, for real. All right, so this is a good time for me to get some water or something. For real? Oh, okay. Um,
Um,
okay, so I don't know. You guys can't see or hear me or whatever. I think subscribers can see me. Maybe I don't know. Um, I'll just put that in chat. Um, so praise Kane. Uh, so as I was saying, I think that's mostly to do with the split between American and like Euro concepts of bleed and LARP, and the idea that if you're coming to a game, you're coming to experience these feelings from your character, from the play, and that's like part of the fun. Um, that that bleed is all right. You're back. Okay, everybody's back. Wonderful. So that bleed is part of the fun of the game. I feel is kind of right, more of a Euro concept. But I've definitely experienced the enjoyment of like the adrenaline rush while LARPing, and knowing that I'm experiencing things like outside of myself, like thoughts and feelings that I probably wouldn't have, as me, Moon, that I'm only going to have as my character. In Sabbat LARP, in particular, that's usually kind of like religious ecstasy, I guess. That kind of like filled up with the love of Cain kind of concept, or that kind of like religious community. I really only experience that in a LARP context. I don't really experience that outside of LARP. I'm not a religious person. Um, but to play a religious person is a fantastic, interesting experience. And of course, in like Camry and other LARP, that kind of power rush of being, manipulative backstabber who like gets people to do what they want without them knowing about it, like that is definitely something that I avoid doing in my real life, um, though I'm told I'm very good at it in LARP. And the kind of power rush and sense of accomplishment you get from basically orchestrating some master plan that you had in mind from the beginning, but all these other people had no idea that that's basically what you were working towards, and that suddenly it all comes together. It's quite a rush. And I don't think that is something you should really try to do in your real life. Don't manipulate your friends, family, and coworkers in grand schemes, please. Um, yeah, I would agree with that completely, Iker. That bleed can be good and it can be bad. Um, yeah, and really what it comes down to is consent. Yeah, I mean, I personally, obviously, am coming from kind of an American LARP perspective, so I'm much more cognizant of the dangers of bleed as opposed to the, I guess, upside of bleed. Um, so I guess from my perspective, I would say that when it comes to bleed, you should you should be able to recognize it and recognize that you're experiencing it. I'd say probably some of the most dangerous things you'll ever hear from another player is, I don't experience bleed or bleed doesn't happen to me. Maybe that's true. Maybe they are built in a certain way where they don't experience bleed, which, can also be concerning because bleed is emotions. And if you don't experience emotions, then that is a red flag that you should talk to a therapist about, probably. Um, so I would say that you have to be cognizant of it and be able to recognize it, be able to recognize the bleed. Yeah, yeah, exactly, Iker. I mean, I'm not going to condemn anybody, but anybody who says they don't feel bleed, for me, that's a red flag, not something disqualifying, but that's definitely something that I'm going to keep in mind when I'm interacting with that person in and out of game, um, to see what they really mean by that. Perhaps they mean that they are so experienced in managing bleed that they don't really consider it an issue. Okay, that's possible. But if they actually mean that bleed doesn't exist, or that bleed they're completely immune to emotion or something like that, then that would be troublesome to me. Um, so for me, I'd say bleed is something that I tend to think of as something that needs to be mitigated. I could see how it could become an issue because it could potentially be addictive, to basically have this sense of like power, being able to like screw people over or manipulate people, that kind of thing, or harm them in this imaginative world, um, that perhaps you don't get in your real life, and that could become addictive, and you could potentially, I guess, seek out bleed, um, and create situations in game that might be troublesome or problematic, especially if not with consent of other players, um, for your own titillation and amusement. That could actually be causing, psychological harm to other people. Um, yeah, exactly. Jesse Ventura. Wow. Okay, so you're like you're possibly my age, if if you're quoting Jesse the Body Ventura, or Jesse the Mind Ventura, famous governor of Minnesota, I believe. Um, another uh, strangely intellectual based labor oriented wrestler, who I think tried to unionize the WWE until Hulk Hogan ratted him out to the bosses. Well, I've got a few more minutes before I have to take off. Um, I mostly just wanted to say Happy New Year. I didn't expect so many people to show up. I guess people are as bored or have nothing to do as me sometimes during the holidays. I'm usually actually kind of busy during the holidays, but this unfortunately things came up this holiday that made me a bit more free than usual. Um, but as I'd say for bleed, if you're playing Seeking Bleed, then that is something that isn't necessarily bad, but that you have to be cognizant of the downsides of it, and you have to be cognizant of other people around you who might not be interested in the kind of role play you're seeking out. Like there are people who really enjoy role playing, like emotional distress, that kind of thing. But those are the kinds of scenes that potentially other players are going to be impacted by. Like you're not crying in a corner by yourself, though that also can be problematic. If by yourself there's a group of people in the room. So when you are showing and displaying these emotions, they affect other people. That's kind of the point of it. And in a perfect world and a good game, the other players are going to riff off that and build a scene out of it. But it's definitely not something that I think other players should be like surprised with. It's not something that I feel you want to go into a casual game or a game you've never experienced before. If you're seeking out bleed, if you're seeking out these really like dramatic, um, I'd say intense role playing experiences at LARP, then you're really gonna have to cultivate a group of players to do that with, who are experienced, consent, and understand the dynamics. I know, and outside of Vampire LARP, I know that is it's out there. Unfortunately, LARPing, especially outside of Vampire LARPs, I would say the kind of more narrative LARPs can get very expensive. Often they have to travel to them, and the tickets themselves can be expensive, unfortunately. Um, and that kind of sucks. I don't think people should have to be constrained or blocked away from those experiences because of budget. Um, and I think Vampire LARP often is something you can do that's usually a more common kind of LARP because it's an IP that has a larger fan base and has a kind of active LARPing community. Um, I think if you want to seek out those more experimental and experiential LARPs, the outside the Vampire LARP, often I feel those could be kind of expensive. I know there are groups in New York that focus on LARPing. I never really dealt with them when I lived in New York. They were there. There was a theater that we would partner with to do Vampire LARP, something like that. But now I believe there are more kind of like experiential, like what are called like immersive theater experiences there. I know there's a community in DC. I have a friend of mine who's very involved with the LARPing community and writing LARPs and the such in DC. And she always stumbles across, well, not really stumbles across, I mean, she's very knowledgeable about it all. So she's always plugged into all the like kind of cool LARPs that are happening, and she actually runs LARPs at Gen Con, I believe. She ran like kind of a it was a really cool concept. It was kind of like a musical wizard school kind of LARP, where like the music played, and then like when your song came on, because I think it was like a prom was like the event. So like when your song came on, like certain like rules applied that kind of like empowered your character in the scene. Like it was very very interesting. I wish I could have gone actually, but this Gen Con I was really swamped with the Writers Symposium stuff. Which actually I'll be at Gen Con again this year with the Writers Symposium. I just got my invite the other day. I wrote them back. I always I'm a big fan of the Writers Symposium at Gen Con. I should really play more games when I'm at Gen Con, but mostly I go to Gen Con to see my friends. And you know, the Writers Symposium, I've been going there a couple of years now, and I'd say the past 2 years have just really been fantastic. I think Maurice Brodus, who now runs the Writers Symposium, has brought a kind of really kind of like academic sensibility to it, which it didn't necessarily have before. And of course, he's very knowledgeable about academe, obviously, and I come from a kind of academic background. You know, I like to put all my expensive diplomas behind me. So I really appreciate that, and approaching kind of games, not strictly from an academic point of view, but definitely talking about games in a serious way, and the writing of games in a serious way, and playing games in a serious way. Obviously, I like games because they're fun, but they also teach me things about myself and other people, and hopefully about the world and how the world is, and more importantly, how the world could be if we all agreed, you know, to the rules of the game. Um, but yeah, I have to run off now. Unfortunately, I have to get some food. I'm hungry. And it's been great chatting. I will try to pop on again either maybe this weekend or Monday morning. I'll try to stick to my schedule. But I'm glad so many people showed up this impromptu stream, and thanks so much for chatting. Actually, having people like interact with me in the chat is is the best part. And I love answering questions and hearing your answers to questions as well. Okay, everybody, I'll talk to you later. And as usual, and as always,